and let us hear what ideas and thoughts you have on this topical area, which is going to be the game changer for the continent of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Lumumba, the champion of the view that there must be African solutions for African problems. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now live on Facebook. I think if you have at any given point in time, we're going to as we proceed with the events of this webinar, we're going to take questions after all of our speakers have presented. I'm now going to introduce our panel of speakers, and I will start with Sean Pereira. He's the Business Development Executive at Lesedi. Sean, please fire away. You've got at least 3 minutes to give us context. Sean, over to you.
Thank you. It's Shane, but not to worry.
Oh yes, Shane.
No stress, no stress. So from a Lesedi perspective, we operate across multiple markets in the power generation sector. For sure, nuclear in Cape Town, but elsewhere, we need to be finding solutions that are applicable more local to site. And so if you take into consideration the local resources that communities might have, and I'll give you a simple example such as Ghana, with I think they're the second largest producers of cocoa, the chocolate and the husks we are looking to use as a fuel to power a biomass plant to the tune of 40 megawatts. Now you must remember that that's baseload, renewables as well. So yes, I think the wind and solar has got its place, but there are many other solutions that can compete against heavy fuel oil, because at the end of the day, it's a commercial related decision many a time with private investors coming on board, where you're competing against the price of heavy fuel oil. And if you look at where the biomass tariffs are going, it's now becoming more commercially feasible. In South Africa, it's a bit difficult because you're competing against a really low base tariff. Whereas in the balance of Africa, those type of solutions are certainly more competitive, but not only from a power standpoint, also to provide local communities job creation opportunities in terms of harvesting, planting additional fields, and so that the fuel can become essentially bankable for the future. Often we find, though, that the smaller projects that are applicable to communities in the region of maybe a couple of megawatts to 5 megawatts to maybe 10 megawatts for a bigger city, you find that your typical lending institutions want to spend at least $100 million. Now, those type of projects don't require that investment. So from a commercial standpoint, there's more opportunities opening, and we can see it, that there's more interest in funding smaller projects. But smaller projects are more feasible in many locations across Africa. That's just on the biomass side of things. And we can look at much smaller hydro, and I think maybe one or two other panel members can talk about that. But inline hydro that's maybe a couple of 100 kilowatts, that's sufficient for communities to get them up and running. I think sometimes we're looking far too large scale, and there's much simpler solutions that can be implemented that you can get off the ground, as you say, Prof, within the next couple of years. I mean, we're looking at biomass projects that we should be able to get off the ground within the next 12 months. So I think there needs to be a more entrepreneurial approach to the African solution. Even solutions, one more thing, even solutions such as in informal settlements, instead of having your oil lamps, you can get solar powered or even rope powered batteries, LED lights to provide lighting. So I think, if we scan the technologies across different spectrums, large and small, everything has its purpose. But I think the most important thing is to see local to site. What is the need? What have you got around you to support your needs from an energy perspective? And also forget what goes hand in hand with energy is water security. And I want to emphasize water because that's another major crisis about to occur on the continent if we're not careful. Thank you.
Shane, I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for the insight. I could still give you another minute if you wanted to give it a go, just as a measure of an exchange for your name. In our next speaker, I'm going to hand over from Senegal, Ryan Collier. He's the CEO of Rosatom Central and Southern Africa. Ryan, I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you, but unfortunately, someone has disabled my video. The host has disabled my video. But as long as everyone can hear me, I think it's fine.
And I hope we can resolve the technical issue as we proceed. Please continue.
All right, perfect, no problem. Thank you so much. My name is Ryan Collier. As you said, I'm the CEO of Rosatom Central and Southern Africa. We are based in Johannesburg. However, I travel the continent quite a lot and currently in Senegal. So I think, just to touch on what the Prof said, I completely agree with him. Africa is a continent that is filled with resources, mineral resources, human resources. We've got an incredibly young population. I think around 75% of the population of Africa is under the age of 35. We've got fantastic agricultural resources, yet we are held back by this problem of energy. We require vast amounts of energy on the continent to actually, get to where we want to be. It's not all gloom, though. I think, if we can look at Kenya, appears to be performing very well. And that was recently highlighted in the World Energy Trilemma Index. The progress in Kenya, I think, can be contributed to a combination of factors, but it's largely driven by effective government policy. And I think that's very vital. Sub-Saharan Africa, although from a low base, has made some progress as well. The pace of household electrification over the past 5 years has increased to population. So currently there's around 20 million new connections per year. So at least energy connection is outpacing population growth currently, which is a positive, although a lot more needs to be done. I just wanted to highlight on what Shane was saying. Smaller projects are vitally important, and I think commercial investment into smaller projects is fantastic, but we still need effective government policy and legislation and instruments to sort of garner that investment. Investors are very keen to invest into various technologies, but only if they are going to be sure that they're going to get their investment out. So I think that's sort of a challenge for African nations, is to make it a conducive environment, as we could say, for investment, private investments. If you look at most of the energy investments into Africa at the moment, it's either direct government investments or it's through a fund, whether it be a European fund, World Bank fund, or things like that. And while these are both very important, we really need private sector investment to push the energy sector in Africa forward. So while the smaller stuff is fantastic, and connecting households and focusing on humanitarian aspects is vitally important, I do feel we still need to pay equal attention to the African Union's ambitious Agenda 2063 master plan, which really envisions Africa's transformation into the global powerhouse of the future. It's sad to say, but Africa's essentially skipped over the second and third industrial revolutions. The continent is home to 16.3% of humanity, but less than 1% of the world's billion-dollar companies, and only about 4% of global GDP. So while Africa certainly cannot miss the fourth industrial revolution, it should still be focusing its attention on beneficiating the vast amounts of resources under its soils. And beneficiation and industrialization requires vast amounts of reliable, affordable, and clean energy. So although Africa is a minor contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and this is likely to remain the case in most forecasts going forward, Africa is on the front line when it comes to the effects of climate change, in particular in its energy sector. Increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as droughts and floods increase instability. We saw exactly what happened to Zambia in 2015 with the droughts. I mean, they lost a great deal of the country's power. So, I mean, I therefore find it very interesting that while African nations are actively exploring the option to include nuclear into their energy mix, as well as waste to energy, biomass, various other things to mitigate these mentioned issues. I mean, I'm talking about baseload power that is available 24/7 to run smelters, to run industry. It's often greatly overlooked, and I cannot be against renewables. I am not against renewables. We're an advocate of wind energy. We own a wind company, but I think you need a balanced energy mix with both renewable energy, solar, wind, gas, a small amount of fossil fuels as well, and then to bolster that with clean energy such as nuclear. And I really feel that, you know, going forward, if we're going to achieve Agenda 2063, we're going to need vast amounts of energy, and it's going to have to be a sustainable energy mix that supports both households as well as industry. So thank you very much. That's my couple words.
Thank you so much, Ryan. They're talking about the link between economic progress, economic development, and energy, that there is really a direct link. And on that note, I'm going all the way to Norway to introduce Anders Kullerud. He is the MD of Shared Value Solutions AS. Anders, I hope you can hear me. Over to you.
I hear you loud and clear, and thank you, Tshepo. Thank you for letting me having some time and discuss this extremely important issue.
Just stay in for a moment. Okay.
I would like to echo a little bit Professor Lumumba, and confirming that I really believe that the energy potential of Sub-Saharan Africa is huge. And we are in a time of transition. There are still quite significant oil and gas or fossil opportunities, but I think Africa and also as the rest of the world are entering into this transition into the renewable energy. If we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, most of the countries actually lack energy and cannot satisfy the UN Sustainable Development Goals number 7, which is actually affordable and clean energy. So we are not only in a transition, but I think we also are in a huge development phase. There is a huge potential for development of renewable energy in Sub-Saharan Africa. And my colleagues in the panel has already mentioned solar and wind. And they go without saying that solar must be a huge potential in Sub-Saharan Africa compared to my country, for instance. So I think in a 20 years time, we may see a completely different energy sector of what we see today. And I think my point today will be to the importance of using this in unique window of opportunity it is for strengthening national participation, local participation, localization of the energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa. We know within the fossil industry, oil and gas industry, which is mature in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there has sort of developed its systems over the years and decades, whereas the new energy is under formation. And it will be very important for sub-Saharan countries actually to participate in the formation, because it will be an opportunity to really strengthen local participation, capacity, technology in this new energy. And also this new energy by nature is local to a larger extent than the fossil type of energy sources. So I think it can be exciting times ahead. My company is particularly working with local content policies, how to maximize the benefit, both for the company and the country, both for the investor and the country. And I think by a constructive collaboration and cooperation between countries and investors, this can be achieved. Having been working in a number of African countries over the years, I see that there is a potential for the private industry investor to enter into the scene in a way that enhance and strengthens the local participation. It's about taking care of an investor's business case, whether it's a local businessman or it's a foreign investor, and the national development agenda. And I formally think that balancing and having a dialogue with both those two sides of the equation, if you like, can give a lot of common interest, a lot of shared values. I think a company's business would need local inputs, would need local employment, would need goods and services locally. The national development agenda will always be to strengthen the economic development in an area. It might be within that energy area you are, but it might also look for spin-offs into other economic sectors. To increase vocational training for a huge energy project will benefit the investor in many cases, because you need that type of skills. But at the same time, you will actually also benefit not only that sector, may also benefit other sectors in the economy, and then contribute to the national development agenda. So our message from experience, when we are entering into this transition zone, and where we're going to try to tap the renewable energy potential in sub-Saharan Africa, is actually to invite for a close dialogue between investors and governments, and look for shared values in this context. I think the country wants to build competence, have to build competence and capacity in this area. The investor would like to be a part of this increasing market, fantastic market. And the only way to actually benefit or to gain from it, both parties, is to sit down and find good solutions. Thank you. I think that's for me now.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Unlocking sub-Saharan Africa's energy potential. I want to go back to Shane, just to pick up on, given the potential that we have in sub-Saharan Africa, and the reality that we face having an entity such as Eskom battling to keep the lights on for commercial and households purposes. What are we to do? What is in your perspective? What are some of the key challenges that are facing an entity like Eskom, and what are the alternatives?
I think, you know, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's quite a deep question, and Eskom's been one of Lesedi's main customers for many, many years. And you always want a strong utility in a country, that's for sure. But I think, you know, just to touch, before I touch on Africa in general, I just want to reference South Africa. And Anders, I know you mentioned the topic on localization. Now, we as an EPC contractor experience this firsthand throughout the value chain, from the EPC contractor to the engineer, to the project manager, to the technician, to the person doing the operations and maintenance, to the artisan, to who makes the margin on procurement items, to who takes the performance guarantee, to the extent of the projects that you can handle as a company. And so if I look back at a seemingly successful 200 billion rand renewable program in South Africa, I would say the devil's in the detail as to whether it was successful from a localization standpoint, because I beg to differ and say most of that money disappeared out the South African fiscus. And until you've got economists that can prove where the money is staying in the fiscus and going throughout the value chain, I'll believe the localization story then. It's from a company standpoint, we've already seen in terms of the risk mitigation program, there's not a single South African company that's taken on the principal contract to execute the works. And if you as the South African company don't have the principal contract to execute the works, unfortunately, you don't dictate how the project is going to be executed. So although you might put in localization targets in the projects, and government might put it there, I can assure you that law firms are standing by international entities negotiating termination points out the contracts that unfortunately localization does not occur. So I think at face value, we think localization can work. My question is, based on recent projects in South Africa, because of the extent of the projects, how much localization really occurred? Not only from a manufacturing standpoint, but from a labor standpoint, and labor across the value chain. And, you know, I don't want to mention any countries in particular, but it's completely unacceptable to have foreign truck drivers, for argument's sake, coming into South African shores. You should use local truck drivers. Now, if it's happening with such elements, I can assure you from a value resource perspective, I'm talking your engineers, your project managers, your project accountants, your quality control, your commercial resources, they are certainly not local, or if they are, I'll be surprised, you know, who they are. So, and we see that even in the emergency program that's just been bid, there's not a single South African entity taking the principal risk, because we don't necessarily have the balance sheet. So even with our company, we know what our financial limitations are. And so there's only certain guarantees that I can put down. So if you want to encourage localization in African countries, you're going to have to see how you can support local industry from a financial perspective to take on the risk for the project. And that risk needs to probably be properly assessed. So, you know, the issue too with making sure that you're giving the work to companies that are capable of performing the works. There's also major infrastructure projects such as Medupi and Kusile that we can reference in South Africa, where you need to consider demobilization post-project. At Project Peak, there was something like 17,000 workers on the project for a 4,800 megawatt coal station. What happens to those people subsequent to the project being commissioned? So they need, and this can all be assessed before RFP stage. So if you want to follow a formal procurement process, that's fine, but do your homework and preparation well in advance. And I think often there's a big gap missing because you haven't done the correct assessment on what can be localized, what needs to be done to be localized in the future, what are the industries of the future in terms of fourth industrial revolution. We are major advocate of nuclear, but I would probably say that as we stand today, it will be very difficult to catch up to that nuclear manufacturing in terms of looking at Korea, for argument's sake. That's your most recent nuclear value chain that's been created. So, you know, you need to know what to localize, what not to localize, and manage expectations appropriately with all stakeholders, and especially those local to site. So, you know, there's far much more preparation that needs to be done with, you know, stakeholders that are not necessarily only the OEM technology provider, but the economists that can do the assessment, your early childhood development centers, your skills academies, your artisan programs that need to be run sustainably. So the sustainability around what you do in Africa needs to be really looked at in depth. And often that's not given priority. The priority is given to the return on investment to the investor. And localization might be punted first, but I can assure you it's not a priority as far as what I've seen in recent years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Perhaps Ryan, maybe take us through your thoughts on the types of energy sources that Africa should be investing in, because we accept that there is a direct correlation between the quality of energy and the quality of livelihood and the quality of economic growth. But so given the context of that Sean has outlined, which areas or sources should we consider immediately in a practical sense for the African continent?
Well, to be honest with you, all sources. So given the energy shortage in our continent and given our ambitions to really sort of industrialize and meet the Agenda 2063, we really need to focus on everything that's available to us. Obviously, the priority should be on clean and affordable energy. I absolutely agree with that. From a Rosatom perspective, yes, our core business is still nuclear power, but we are more a green energy company than simply a nuclear company. So for instance, we're able to offer hydro, small scale hydro, which in certain circumstances, as Shane was saying earlier, is very suitable. If you have a consistent flow of water near a small community, you are able to put a small scale hydro in and provide them power. Or you could combine hydro and solar to get a more baseload solution. I think, you know, and maybe if we look at South Africa's context, because it's a very particular one, we are still currently 83%, I think it's over 80% coal, right, in the country. But we have a large-scale decommissioning plan from now until 2050. We have still large industry in this country that relies, however, on baseload power. So the question comes in that, you know, if we are going to decommission all of these coal-fired power plants, what are we going to replace them with? You know, we have a lot of coal and there is clean coal technology, but the problem is you will not get international investment on new coal-fired power plants, right? So then we could look at hydro in South Africa, for instance, and we've got small hydro potential, but there's no large hydro potential to go on our industries. You've got wind and solar, and we are completely satisfied with the addition of wind and solar into the energy mix. But for every megawatts of wind and solar that you put into the grid, you need to be able to back it up with something. We know the sun does not shine all day, but our industries run all night. We know the wind doesn't blow all day either. So we either need large scale storage, which unfortunately at this point is still very costly, or we need to back it up with gas. And the only problem in South Africa currently is we've got gas under exploration. We've got a plan, but we've got no end in sight into when that will actually be realized. So the worrying aspect for me is that while I'm absolutely happy and we will be participating in the next bid window for renewables as a company, is that we need to be able to back up what we're putting into the grid. We need to be able to support our industry and grow our industry. It's a very simple graph in economics. The GDP per capita and the GDP, the energy use per capita is a straight line graph. The more energy and more particularly the more electricity you use, the higher your GDP per capita is. So, you know, I really do think that large-scale nuclear still has a very important role to play in South Africa, particularly with our decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. Going into the rest of Africa, I think African countries should use all resources that they have available to bring as much electricity onto the grid as possible, make industry possible, make smelters possible. You know, instead of taking our beautiful raw materials out of the ground and sending them abroad to be processed and then buying products back, we need to cut that part of the value chain and we need to do it ourselves. But for that, we need smelters, and smelters require huge amounts of energy. So I think, you know, hydro in Africa is still going to play an incredibly important role. Oil and gas will play an important role for the foreseeable future. Wind and solar will definitely play a role, but we need to be able to back it up, not just to provide electricity sometimes, but to be able to provide baseload solutions to garner industry. So then I think, you know, then we've got really niche sort of markets where we could have waste to energy, which is another fantastic solution for Africa. Africa has a municipal waste issue. It's all over the continent. So essentially what you're able to do is use municipal waste to produce electricity, which is another very good source and a baseload source. So yeah, I think the short answer is whatever we do, we need to create a mix that really ticks the energy trilemma. And the energy trilemma is affordability, sustainable supply, and environmental. So whatever we do, we just need to keep those three things in mind to make sure that we're both able to give people the right to electricity, but at the same time, you know, bolster industry and grow economies, which is exactly what we need to do.
Thank you, Ryan. It sounds more like as a continent, we've got the resources, we've got the capabilities, and there's perhaps which parts of the world are doing this right? What can we learn and from which regions of the world?
You know, I think that's a very difficult question because we're not the rest of the world. And earlier you were saying we need African solutions for African problems, and we could take South Africa as a prime example of that, right? We'll be moving away from coal, and if we're going directly into renewables, which, you know, some European countries have done, we don't have the option to simply buy electricity from our neighbors when we need it.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to hear from Anders because we are running with time.
No problem.
Just in terms of his view on the best practices around the world, who's doing this right, if any, and what can we learn given the fact that we've got the resources, but practically, who can we learn from?
It's a hard question. I think you can learn from different countries, but I think you can transfer experience, for instance, from Europe or from over country, but it has some limitation because the context is different. There has been a number of initiatives in Sub-Saharan Africa historically to learn from the so-called European or Norwegian model for how to manage the oil resources, which in our country has worked pretty well. But you know, it is based on a certain historical fact and a context when we entered into that energy era, which doesn't exist or is different in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you should try to extract something, you should always base it on your own context, your own setting, and maybe have a very little bit look into the others, but find your own context, understand your own ground, and maybe the number one lesson is try to strike the balance between the country's development agenda, which is extremely important, and the investors' need, and keep that dialogue. If you have, it is, for instance, localization that we enter into, and I very much appreciate Shane's description of dilemmas. I have seen exactly the same dilemmas. And I also see the need, as Ryan said, to look at the whole spectrum of energy sources, not only renewables, but the whole thing. You probably need everything. But I think the important thing is that you try to have a smart view, you may call it, on how to maximize the national development agenda, maximize localization, maximize the benefit. And that is to not have focus too much on rigorous policies, regulations, where a certain percentage of the employees should be in the company or in the process, where a certain number of suppliers should be there. Much more important is to make framework for the local suppliers. For instance, financial risk, as Shane pointed on. How can you make that financial risk less? How can you protect the financial risk of the local supplier? How can you benefit from the technology and competence coming with the investor, which means to invite investor in. Don't put restrictions on expats on something, but put requirements on the investor to really work together and form partnerships and make sure that those partners are equipped, and base your policy on your own state. And I think that's extremely important. I'm sorry to tell, but yes, our country, Norway, we have been very successful in managing the resources. But sorry to tell, I think that's that is it can be, all that lesson learned cannot be transferred. Not to US, not to Latin, South America, not to Africa. Parts of it may be, but we should not, I think, put it on your own grounds and develop from there.
Thank you, Anders. On that note, I'm gonna invite questions from the audience. I see Solly Moeng with a smile, and maybe Solly, just to pick up, because Andres talks about shared value, the fact that we need to take the interest of society into and communities into account. We also need to take the interests of shareholders or investors, and then look at sustainability and the environment in the long term. But what we know that when it comes to energy projects, there's a lot of money being invested and resources being invested, and as a result, you end up having graft and corruption in the process. How important is governance, Solly, in energy projects, just to help take us forward? You are mute, Solly.
There you go. Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, so I had a question, but I'll link it to this. Look, governance is important. We've seen in South Africa over the past 10, 15 years. You've just mentioned graft and suspicion. And this leads to the question I have about nuclear energy. We know that South Africa still relies heavily on fossil fuels. These are being decommissioned, as Ryan is saying, and they have to be decommissioned if you want to see more overseas or international investments in new energy of the future. But the question is, nuclear is still a clean energy when it's in place, and it can support the kind of base load that is needed, that exists in big industrialized economies such as South Africa. How do we depoliticize nuclear? Over the past government in South Africa, that will rather the past administration played a role in having this cloak of suspicion over nuclear. How do we change the narrative around nuclear, around the fact that it is practical, it is clean, and it does provide the kind of base load that is needed for an economy as big as ours? That's my first question. My second question is, how do we, basically linked to fossil fuels, how do we convince those multitudes of workers and small businesses that have relied on the extraction and transportation of coal, that when their coal has to go away and it has to be replaced by something else, how do they become unemployed, redundant, or can some form of scaling happen so that those people continue to play a role in that sector?
Gentlemen, that's two questions from Solly. There's another question. I'm going to take that question from Victor at Pereira. Victor Sibeko.
Good morning. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Quite insightful discussion going on. My question to the gentlemen, as practitioners and people that are directly involved in the energy space, should we leave the responsibility of energy generation to government, or should we bring in more private sector? And now this brings in the question raised by President Moeng on governance, because if the power lies with government, then we've got ongoing problems. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I'll start off with Ryan, and then Shane, you can join in, Ryan, to take on any of the questions. Ryan?
All right. I think, sorry, let me just switch my camera on. I think I'll definitely handle the first question in terms of how, to depoliticize it. And the one unfortunate aspect of nuclear in general is that government always needs to be involved, at least from a security and oversight perspective of a nuclear power plant. So whether the plant is owned by a government or not, according to international regulation, the government of that country needs to be responsible for the plant itself. So, removing politics completely from nuclear is very difficult. However, I do believe that if we continue to look at the economics, the climate, and no CO2 emissions of nuclear, as well as the fact that it's got the highest capacity factor of any other source globally, as well as the fact that it's the most predictable in terms of cost over its lifespan because of the very short, small share of fuel. At some point, I think we will come to a realization that in many instances we don't have a choice but to build new nuclear. And I think if you can look at what's happening in the European Commission at the moment, where they're looking at should nuclear be classified as a green energy source, and so far all reports point to yes. It's a zero carbon affordable source of energy over its lifespan. So I think from that perspective, it is difficult to completely move politics out of it, but I do believe that it's a source that is going to continue to garner more support in the coming years. And in Africa, it doesn't need to be large-scale nuclear power plants. The 1,200 megawatt plants that we are building now in Egypt or elsewhere in the world, there are small modular reactor solutions that I think are going to play a key role in providing baseload power in Africa. And I'm talking about units that are between 50 and 300 megawatts that can be produced on a production line and can be installed in a far shorter period of time. So I think that's really where the future of the industry is going. Thank you. Thank you,
Ryan. Shane?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think I'd just like to comment on the, from a South African perspective, we've seen now a whole host of opportunities open for the private sector where we can, provide solutions to private off-takers by wheeling power through the Eskom grid, for argument's sake. So for me, I think the more we can have private companies look after power generation in not only, in the various regions, I think the better. But from a regulatory and governance standpoint, obviously the various frameworks need to be in place for that to occur. But certainly, the IPP model is certainly one that I think will work in the African context, as long as the various frameworks are provided by government. And we've just now seen in South Africa, no need to apply for a generation license below 10 megawatts, which alleviates quite a bit of relief in terms of time and schedules on getting to finalization of power purchase agreements and starting the construction of your projects once they are fully bankable. So I think it will be a much quicker route to providing solutions to the market. And because the risk is taken by the investors and the private companies, we are more likely to see solutions that are delivered sustainably and not, as we've seen necessarily in the past, where government tries to take on these power projects. So for me, I think there needs to be a far greater role by the private sector in getting solutions to the continent. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Anders, I hope you got a view on one of the questions.
Yeah. For the question about the government's role versus the private, I think it is the mix. It is the balance. You will need both. For sure, you will need the government to make up the framework, the regulation, the laws. You need a strong regulator on the government side, and that's by far the most important, to ensure that and be confident that you can give the private sector the opportunity to invest and give a long and sustainable and predictable framework for that. Because the energy sector is a vital and important infrastructure in society. So you need a very, very strong government input to that. You may also have governmental companies or state companies. The important there is to separate it completely from the regulator, the government. Otherwise, you just mix up the roles completely. The important thing is that you need the private sector. You need, probably most countries need the foreign investors, capital, technology, but you need also your own private sector involved in this. That's the only way to build up sustainable thing. It might be that the state gives some help to start with, or somehow, but you need to build up your own the country's private sector in parallel. So it's a balancing act.
Thank you, Ryan. I got that factor around involving. It's a multi-pronged local and international stakeholder engagement initiative. And on that note, I'm going to check if there are no other questions. I'm going to actually open up, go back to Shane for closing remarks just before we end the session. Shane?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, you know, from a closing remark standpoint, the urgency is there, you can see it, but the need for us to look at the preparation phase is certainly, you know, needs to be under scrutiny. You know, what it takes to get the project to financial close, and often your investors require some upfront development, and who's going to be funding that development. So there's institutions such as the Development Bank of Southern Africa. There's you know, a whole host of different, you know, options to get the project developed to a status of bankability. And I think when looking at it, you need to apply your mind from all three legs of the stool. So you got your financial bankability, but how's your fuel security? How is your offtake security? Do you have bankable offtakers? You know, do you have some large corporates in country that can be seen as bankable offtakers to procure your power over a period of time? And have you done your assessment on the sustainability of industry in the context of power generation? So I think there certainly needs to be more stakeholders at the table other than your typical IPP, your investor, government. There needs to be, you know, additional stakeholders that have other hats added to the equation to do the assessment. That could be from a multiply effect calculation from your economists. It can be from a sustainability standpoint in terms of your population that you want to see in the future. There needs to be the water security element attached as well to the power solutions that we're looking at. So I think there needs to be more dialogue between private industry that might have some experience to share with government, and to maybe, you know, Solly, in another session in the not too distant future, hopefully, we can maybe have certain stakeholders around the table where private industry can share some of its experience and frustrations on why projects are not getting to the stage that you want as soon as you want them. So I think, you know, additional dialogue is critical. Thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Ryan?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I completely agree with Shane on that, as well as Victor. So, I mean, there needs to be, if I can say anything, there needs to be a balance and a mix in terms of the power generation that, you know, we do decide to implement on the continent. And we certainly do need to see more private investments coming into the region. And unfortunately, most of the region's private investments into infrastructure has gone to a handful of countries, with South Africa alone accounting for more than half. So ultimately, whether projects can attract finance depends on whether developers and investors believe that they will deliver adequate returns, and the timely repayments of debt to lenders. So I think this requires, you know, various things, including a sound investment framework, such as an appropriate tariff scheme, institutional and regulatory structures that are well placed and well implemented, as well as a robust contracting framework for offtake agreements to manage the risks. And I think, you know, if we can start moving in this direction, we will see more private investment into energy in Africa, and hopefully we'll be able to close the gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We're going to go to Anders for closing remarks, and thereafter I'll hand over to Solly.
Thank you. I think there are exciting times ahead of us. There is this transition. There is a huge need for develop energy. in sub-Saharan Africa. And this will require initiatives from governments, from local investors, from foreign investors. So it will be a need for and room for all parties in this growing market. So there is room for everybody. And I think this transition and this development will be fast if we invite private investors into the scheme, ensure that your framework and the regulatory is well kept, and then for any foreign investors, ensure that there is a good business case, there is some profitability in the country, but put requirements on a dialogue, put requirements, listen, we need to discuss, we give you this opportunity, but we have a national development agenda. We need to develop our own industry. What is your input to that? And we will protect your business case. By having this type of dialogue and much more flexible approach, and let's say, what do you want after 20 years? You want local private energy companies that are strong, that may be even able to move internationally and compete in other jurisdictions and in other continents. And how to achieve that? You have to use this huge opportunity you have of the growing energy market in sub-Saharan Africa and develop those companies. So and that's your development agenda, and get all the expertise, get all the capital in, and confident the investors that are able to get a decent return on the investment at the same time. And the only way to achieve it is dialogue, and not be too sort of rigorous, but have a dialogue and be very clear on what is our goals, and we would like you to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. Dialogue, localize, and investors create a compelling business case, but also take accountability. You can't outsource your own capability for the long term. Solly, I'm going to hand over to you for some closing remarks, and we are now up at 12:13. I think we are almost at the end of the session.
Thank you very much, Tshepo, and thank you very much to our awesome panelists. It has been, I didn't know what to expect, and everything that was put on the table by all of you was awesome. It's true, Shane, we need to have this conversation again. We need to think of another way to frame it so that we address the real issues that face Africa's desire or requirements to, you know, to get to the stage where we have the kind of capacity on the ground throughout the continent that will help Africa make real the realization of the Agenda 2063, as Ryan kept saying. Absolutely. I would like to thank all of you, for being part of this thing, and I have to thank our sponsors, well, our partners really, for these webinars. Public Relations Institute on Southern Africa, PRISA, is an awesome enabler of these events. Crowdfunding is based, crowd product. It's based all the way in Chennai, India. Sai, Vinay, Dora, everybody, thank you for making these conversations possible. We are a globally connected Africa Brain Summit, as you can tell. And I want to also thank of course, the PLO Lumumba Foundation based in Kenya, which is also an awesome partner to the Africa Brain Summit, as well as Travel Essence Magazine, which is based in Dubai. So we are really African, but global, modern African. And next month, we're going to host with the communications, PR and communications fraternity across the continent. Thanks to PRISA, the World Communication Forum, and APRA, we want to have a conversation about the role of PR and communications in country destination positioning. what are we getting wrong? What are we getting right? You know, especially given the COVID-related communication throughout the continent. Have we communicated properly to local communities, to the world about what we're doing? Have we been aligned in the way we communicated all these challenges and maybe challenges in the future? What lessons has Africa learned from the communications around COVID-19 and other things as well, really? How do you position Africa as a destination across the world? So we're going to have this conversation on the morning of the last Thursday of June. Please join us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Tshepo, for moderating this awesome conversation today.
Thank you so much. Have a great day,
Cheers,
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Thank you so much. Thank you, President. Thank you, President Moeng.
Thank
President
you,
Matseba.
President Tshepo, President Tshepo and Matseba.
Yeah, we'll catch up on the flip side.
Yep.
Thank you.